Hello and welcome to Transforming Meal Times. I'm so excited to talk with you guys about this because this book has been absolutely transformational. It's the talk today that we're going to be talking together about is based on this book called Nourished. And I know it's backwards, sorry about that, but it says Nourished. It's by Deborah McNamara, and she is a developmental psychologist who works with Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who is, of course, one of my all-time loves. As you know, my cat is named Gordon after Dr. Gordon Neufeld. I love this man. He is basically taken all of the developmental research about human beings from the time it was written down, and he's distilled all of this content over, the past 2 centuries of information about how we develop as humans, and he has distilled it down into these very beautiful theories and ideas about how we can help our children and ourselves come into our full human potential. And so a lot of Deborah's ideas stem from her work with Dr. Gordon Neufeld, and of course, her own research on looking at why and how is food connected to our attachment and our ability to come into our full human potential. Why are these two things connected? Why does it go beyond just food at the table? What are we really talking about here? And so I can't wait to just, dive into this with you guys. And for those of all the other registrations who are waiting for the replay, so we'll have to be extremely amazing today, friends.
Okay.
Barbara and Jana are on it. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves and share a little bit about just, your family and what are you thinking you're curious about this content for today? Like what brought you to the idea like, that sounds interesting. I'm going to go to that.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay. We are a three-generational household. Um, our daughter and our grandson have lived with us actually since he was 6 months old, as um, Ian's daddy had a serious chronic illness and he died
Mhm.
almost about 2 years ago. And so we've had the privilege of doing the parenting of the early years of a human's life again. It's been very, very precious. We
Mhm.
have three adult children, the one daughter that lives with us, and then two of our adult children. Actually, we have three because one is married. So our three adult children do live in the Triangle area. Um, and my husband is also, of course, part of our family. So I was intrigued by what are some other creative things I can do as these three generations sit down to a meal. Um, we often do high-low buffaloes. At everyone takes a turn talking about the highs of their day, the lows of their day, and what surprised them.
Mhm.
And so I'm looking for other ideas to enhance the quality of our time together.
Mhm. I love it. I love it. What for you, Jana?
All right. In my household right now, we have my husband and I and our youngest, who's 12. And then I also have three adult children. One of them is my son-in-law. So I have uh they all three of them live close by. And so we have once a week family night where we have dinner together. And one of the things that really interests me about this book is learning more about, how food connects with families and development. And in my sort of family history with my parents, there's a lot of like food issues. And so I would like to learn more about not creating food issues. Um, but also we love family night and we try to make it really like enjoyable, and I guess just wondering how to like enhance that, but also thinking about when my adult children are not with us for meals, because then it's three of us, and it's just a really different dynamic. For my youngest, there's a big age gap, And yeah, I just want to learn more about how to make it more appropriate. I don't know. I'm here to
Mhm.
learn.
Awesome. Well, it's great because I relate to both of you, of course. In my own life, I have an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old. My 21-year-old currently does not live at home, and we have family night like Jana, couple of nights a week where everybody comes and we're here together. And so this book has been so helpful to me, just learning about how deeply our roots of attachment can be deepened through our connection through gathering together with food. And then I also relate, Barbara, to your story of what you're creating, this multi-generational home. And I lived with my parents, with my husband. My parents built a beautiful home when my children were 6 months old and 3, and we lived with them for 10 years. So for their 10 years, so my daughter was 13 and my son was 10 when we moved in and bought our own home. And those 10 years were amazing. And as a parent coach, I look back and realize that so much I avoided so much of the challenges that I see some of my clients are experiencing because I had the support of my parents in that space with me. And cooking together and making meals together was a really big part of my life with my mom. And so, yeah, and my children have an incredible relationship with my parents as a result. So many benefits coming out of that experience. And so what a great combination of experiences that we can talk about and share as we explore these ideas. So I'm just going to go ahead and share with you both the agenda so you know what we're going to be covering in some broader terms. So let me share my screen with you. So let's see, today we're going to start off with just talking about this idea of what Barbara, I'm sorry, I want to call Deborah Barbara, but Deborah is the author. And it isn't even connected to the fact that we have Barbara here. I just want to call Deborah Barbara. She just seems like more of a Barbara to me, but um, anyway, so emotional nourishment is our first topic, and which is really, so interesting, the idea that how our emotions are connected to food, and then looking at how we create more connection, which we both of you mentioned wanting to do, and then looking at what are some of the challenges that are typical, especially we're particularly talking about North American culture, and what can we learn from other cultures in how they have avoided some of the challenges that North Americans are experiencing around the dinner table. And then we're going to finish up with just how we can empower ourselves as parents, grandparents, to really have what is the full picture that we're looking at here. Sound good?
Excellent.
Okay. All right. So yeah, so let me go ahead and minimize. Oh, I can't minimize this. So let me see how I want to do this. I'm going to put you guys over here and pull up my notes. So basically, what I would love to hear, I think what would be giving us some context for today and thinking a little bit about, we're here to learn this mealtime and how it's more important than just feeding, and we get that, and that there's this real golden opportunity with the idea of creating connection around a table where there's food that goes beyond just the nourishment of the food. And we're going to be diving into basically how do we transform these moments that we have with grandchildren, with our children, into connection, love, and a sense of belonging. Um, so one thing that I thought would be fun is just, do you have like a fond memory either of the current family that you're talking about, or even your family of origin that would be associated with a meal? And why does that stand out to you as a fond memory? Um, I'll let you think about it. I'll go first since I know that's like, let me think about that. So, um, like I was saying about that we, had this 10 years with my parents and we made these great meals. But one night I can remember that stands out to me that was so amazing. And I think all of us would share that this is one of our memories in that time is that my mom, it'd been a busy day. I worked at my children's school. We all came home and did all the things that you do after school to get rid of all of the stress of the day. And my mom had decided she was going to make chili and homemade cornbread. And we always had dinners together and we always looked forward to it. We sat around the big table. And I remember we came together and we had had chili before, so it wasn't like, this was anything new, but we just could not get over how good it was. It was amazing. This chili was so good. And for some reason that night was just really beautiful and magical and everybody had such a great time and we just kept raving about the chili. And I think my kids were like around 6 and 9 at the time. So it was also chili wasn't necessarily something that a little 6 and 9 year old would typically love, but it was so good. And ever since that time, we've always said, Grandma, can you make that meal again? And she's tried to make that chili again, but she's like, you know what? There was something so sweet and amazing about that making that for you that it was just must have been some special dose of love that night because we've never been able to match, even though she's like, this is the recipe I use. We can never get that chili that tasted so good again. And I love that Deborah goes into can food have love in it? And in the book, and she talks about how you don't have to like cooking, you don't have to like grocery shopping, you don't even have to like to cook. But if you love the people who you cook for, there will be love in it. And that was exactly what happened with this night of this chilly night that we all remember. Any stories that you can remember of a meal that that stands out to either of you?
Racking my brain, girl. I don't think I had anything magical like that one.
That's
I do
fine.
remember that my mom didn't love cooking, but she liked to bake.
Mhm.
But she was the primary cook. But my dad loved to cook, and he would cook on the weekends. And so I remember his cooking more than my mom. Sorry, mom.
Yeah.
And I do remember we had like this like pot, for lack of a better word, that was like maybe like a ceramic pot that was a beautiful pot. And anytime my dad would cook, he would like make these one pot sort of meals. Like they could be like this stir fry or they could be whatever. And he would put it in this pot. So I remember this pot on the table. I don't know. That's what came
Yeah.
to mind.
Well,
And
yeah.
it's not one meal, it's many meals that we would have
Mhm.
around the table. We all always ate around the table. Actually, I don't know if that's completely true. I do remember like watching the Muppets while eating occasionally. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, where's that pot?
I don't know. I should ask.
You should. That's
Mhm.
a pot
It's a
that
magic pot.
it's a magic pot.
Hmm.
How about for you, Barbara?
That's such a sweet tradition, Jana. I was just sitting here thinking, what could be our pot?
Yeah, and I don't think it was on purpose. I don't think there was any intention of like, I'm always going to use this pot. I think it was the right size or, whatever, but it just happened to be in, of course, when you're little, your eye level is lower. And so I see like the side of the pot. I don't look into the pot. I don't know what was in the pot so much as what the pot was there in front of my eyeballs.
Hmm. And it's associated with your dad, which
Yeah,
is, cool.
yeah.
Yeah, for me, it was sort of a general memory as well. I grew up in the Midwest, and we lived about 400 miles from my grandparents, who were farmers. And the meals at Grandpa and Grandma's on the farm were just amazing. My grandmother was an amazing cook, and even at her funeral, people came up and said, "Oh, we always wanted to get an invitation to your grandmother's house for a meal
Wow.
because her food was so good." Um, and just it was the quality of the food. But I think, looking back on it, I have some of her recipes, and it's like, why did this taste so good? And I know it's because grandma made it.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes from things she had grown. And then it was the time when all of us were together. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it we had very gender specific roles when I was growing up. And so at mealtime, it was the time when everyone was together and all the guys would be coming in from the field or wherever. And my mom and grandma and I would have been in cooking together. And I have wonderful memories of cooking with them as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, such key points here. It's interesting how we have something, a physical memory of something that your dad cooked with and Jana, and then we've got Barbara's story of like a time when both, males and females are coming together around this dinner table, but even though you have grandma's recipes, it it's not exactly the same
No.
because there was something about all being together, those vegetables from that farm and grandma cooking, it's so beautiful. So we're getting into some of the emotional nourishment ideas. And so when we recognize that our kids' receptiveness to nourishment, it's extending beyond physical. It's about ensuring that what Deborah and Neufeld really talk about is this idea of emotional rest, that we put our children into a state of rest, and conveying that it's their presence at the table that matters deeply to us. And that when we feel that sense that we matter and that we're desired to be seen and we want to connect, that puts humans at this place of rest where they can take in food. Um, and I don't know whether, we've all been probably at a table where it's been, a night where it's been calm and there's been joy at the dinner table or at a mealtime experience. And then we've also probably experienced other meals that haven't been as pleasant, um, too, like where there's been conflict or where there's tension or that there's something that's being emphasized, at the table. And one of the stories that Deborah McNamara shares is about this little boy, and he refused to try new foods. He only wanted to eat toast. That was his diet. He wanted to have toast. And so the parents were coming to her. She's a psychologist, and so she works in therapy. And they were asking her, like, what do we do? How do we can't, everything we try to tell him he can't have toast, he has to have this, and he's not getting proper nutrition. And we try to do all the education about how good broccoli is. I'm sure that doesn't go over very well. Um, um, and so Deborah's guidance and thinking about, well, if we really understand to put this idea that this little boy, something is going on where food is become the outlet for his unrest in perhaps the relationship, that there's something going on, and this is how it's manifesting into this idea that he only wants toast. And in North America, we're kind of obsessed with the idea of what children eat, how much they eat, and it creates a lot of tension and anxiety and stress, for North American parents, because food has become the most important part of any meal generally in North America. And so she suggested that they come alongside him. And rather than forcing him to eat other foods, that they create a variety of different ways to eat toast. So not because they approve of toast, but like, so they were like thinking like peanut butter and jam on toast and avocado toast and egg on toast, and that they could join him with whatever toast he wanted, but that they would eat toast as well, and they would come alongside him. And rather than focusing on that, um, that they would actually just create a really warm dinner atmosphere, let go of what he's eating, and focus on being together, which is something that you mentioned, Barbara, that it was about being together. That was actually the magic was there in that meal. So it didn't happen overnight that shifted. But what was interesting is how coming alongside and taking the focus off what this child was eating, and instead creating a very relaxed, emotionally resting, warm place for space for eating, it allowed for him to then his whole focus shifted, and eventually he was open to new foods, and he was able to expand his palate, and it kind of faded away. I'm going to share with you on the screen here some of the points of what she talks about in the book. So let me pull this up for you so you can see it, and I'll send these slides to you as well so you have them to reference. So when we look at this concept of emotional rest, and maybe Jana, we'll just all read these so it's not just my voice. Would you mind reading this first one?
Yeah. Digestion and emotional rest. Our bodies do not digest food unless we are at emotional rest. This underscores this physiological connection between our emotional state and our physical health, particularly in how we process and absorb nutrients from our food.
Yeah, so pretty interesting. I mean, we can't, so if you can imagine if there's tension and we're like, okay, you need to eat that. And the child is like, I don't want to, I don't like it. And there's tears or even, just this tension. They're actually, whatever food we're getting down them, they're not able to digest. So I'm like, oh gosh, this is really, this is how many American homes who's actually getting fed. So such an
Wow.
interesting point. Yeah, so Barbara, do you want to take this next one?
Sure. Emotional intelligence and digestion. Emotions contain intelligence that the brain needs, and the brain plays a more significant role in digestion than previously understood. This suggests that our emotional health can directly influence our gut health, further highlighting the need for emotional rest and well-being.
Yeah, she gives a great story about her niece who is coming over to do trick-or-treating with her daughters, and they're having dinner. They're having a nice, nutrient dense dinner before they go out trick-or-treating and get candy. And they're having some kind of chicken dinner, and her niece isn't eating. And so Deborah's like, how are you? Are you feeling okay? And she's like, my tummy's upset. Um, and I don't want to eat, I just don't feel like eating. And so of course, as American, we can imagine North American parents like, oh, my child must have this chicken or whatever before they go out and have all this candy. This is horrible. I can't believe my child's not eating. And but Deborah, knowing what she knows, she said, oh, do you have some worry bugs in your tummy tonight? Is there something that you're worried about? And she was like, worry bugs. She's like, yeah, that's something that my daughters, I say to my daughters sometimes, to your cousins sometimes, because they'll get this feeling in their tummy where they feel a little worried, and it's kind of like feels like they're like in their tummy is churning butter, and just like working really hard and not wanting to let them eat. And so we call them worry bugs. And she's like, no, I don't have any worry bugs. And so she's like, okay, well, if you do, if you think about something that you might be worried about or anything, you can let me know. It's okay. And so it was clear that her niece didn't really know what was bothering her, but she just couldn't eat. So they went trick-or-treating and they got to this house that was at the end of the block, and it was really haunted, like decorated to be this big haunted house. And her niece says, I, oh, Auntie Deborah, I know what the worry bugs are about now. And she said, oh, what is it? She said, I have been seeing this house. They've been decorating this house all week, and I thought we were going to go inside of it, and it was really scary, and I didn't want to go in. And so she's like, oh, I understand. I understand. No, we don't have to go inside if that's too scary. So this idea that our emotions actually, when we feel something, and this is outside of even food, like I think this is such insight to us as humans that our emotions actually carry intelligence, and they're telling us about something about what we're either worried about or afraid, or that we're frustrated, um, and that we need to listen to that, and then we can have more. It's almost like using our intuition. It's connected to our intuition, and so I think that's really helpful. And she says that when we're scared, that our brain actually, so this idea that our gut and our brain are connected, like we know Jana and I have been doing some more look at fasting and things, and learning a lot about just sugar, for example, and how if there's, the microbiome has candida in it, that it will send these messages. The actual bacteria of this sugar sends a message to the brain, and the brain says, I want more sugar to feed these bugs. Well, it's interesting that emotions are playing into this as well. Like they don't have to be a real physical element in the gut, but that something like fear shuts down the digestion, the desire to have food. So if we're worried, she says, something like fear makes it so that we don't want to eat, and we in fact might have a stomach that feels upset, where we want to either we feel nauseous, we might have diarrhea when we get nervous, things like that. So it's so fascinating how the brain and the gut communicate and tell us something about our what's going on for us. Um, any thoughts about that?
I just feel like it's very I guess confirming, like as you were telling the story about the little girl and the trick-or-treating, and I just can kind of identify with other times, either where my own children had similar experiences, or the times where I'm like, just eat it anyway, like
Yeah.
just thinking about how awful that would be. I'm like kind of replaying all my parenting troubles around food. I'm like, oh no. Yeah, and that makes me think of my adult children, and like what did we do as parents to create maybe food issues for them that they may have, that how do we undo it? And so I'm thinking about those things, and how do I undo some of the things that happened in my own life? I mean, I remember sitting at the table and saying, like, you need to eat your green beans before you get up from the table. And I'm like, they're cold, they're slimy, they're disgusting, I don't want to eat them. I remember sitting there for a really long time. And I don't remember if I ate them or not, but I remember sitting there for a really long time. And I, of course, told myself I would never do that to my own children. And I didn't. But I mean, there were other things
Yeah.
that I did that would have been, not healthy.
Hmm.
Emotionally not healthy, or even physically not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me too of just the fear that I would have as a caregiver to my children around them not getting something in their tummy, and then
Yeah.
feeling a sense of guilt, right? Like it would come, like I just felt like it was my responsibility to make sure that they ate well and that they ate enough. And so it's all tied to this idea of my job as a parent. Um, and this is so helpful, I feel like, to just instruct us on, as caregivers, that it's not about the food. Food is secondary.
Mhm.
It's the relationship and the emotional rest that must come first and be primary to the consumption of food, because we're not in a food scarcity
Mm-mm.
place. Most of, the majority of those of us in North America, um, which is a very different thing when you think of a situation where there is food scarcity, why that has a whole other set of challenges. Or if you were raised at a time in history when there was less food, how that could create other issues around food as a parent or a grandparent. All right. Our next one, creating conditions of rest. Eating should serve the purpose of bringing people together, nurturing not just the body, but also relationships and emotional connections. All right, Jana, if you want to take the next one.
Sure. Emotional roots and resilience. Deep emotional roots are described as the birthplace of human resilience and vulnerability. This suggests that emotional rest and well-being are foundational to developing resilience, highlighting the importance of addressing and nurturing our emotional needs.
Yeah, there were so many really beautiful stories in the book about how food can really help with this idea of resilience. Like, she used an example of a child going off to college, and the parent would send these care packages in the mail of like their favorite snacks or favorite foods or something. And even to the point that one mom had made the child some kind of food, traditional food, and froze it and then sent it with them to college, and they were able to put it in their freezer and take them out when they needed some comfort from home. That it just comforted them to know, like, I have this food that reminds me of home. um, are there any special smells or anything that, in terms of when you think of home, or the idea that food is connected to, emotional roots for you? Are there certain smells that you're like, oh, that reminds me of a particular holiday or home?
I would say there's too many. I mean, there's lots, and I think that it would be like those smells would have to like kind of come up, but um it kind of made me think about there was a time before the pandemic that we homeschooled our kids, and we had a group that would homeschool together, and twice a week we would have soup with there were three families, and we would always like bring stuff that we had, and we would just kind of like stone soup idea where we just bring stuff and throw it all together. And so during the pandemic we'd be like um missing our group uh, a lot. And then later, once we started, having people over again, like my kids started talking about, we really need to have soup. Like they were really like attached to this soup. And I'm like, it was just soup. And it was never the same soup because we didn't know what we were going to put in it. We just like would make the soup and it would be great, make the house smell good. Yeah, that was kind of what came up for me.
A memory of like a gathering that you would have, and how important soup then.
Yeah.
So fun. Yeah, how about
Yeah.
for you, Barbara? Any certain smells that you're like, oh, that sends me directly to my roots or to my home
Mm.
base?
Baking. My grandparents grew up in a time when there was food scarcity.
Hmm.
And then my mom was part of the Great Depression. And so treats and baking was a very special occasion. It was always when people were together or for holidays or whatever. It's not a one particular item, but whether it was grandma's blueberry pie or
Hmm.
making a cake for us, it
Yeah.
definitely brings back those fond memories.
Yes. And it's been so hard because, welcome, Amy. You can join us if you want to. Um, that Thanksgiving, we always would have my sister, she would bake biscuits, but now like literally almost everyone in our family is gluten-free. And it's like it doesn't, I mean, she's still
Oh,
making them, but they're not the same.
right.
So it is funny how, you have to also figure out how do you create these ties to some favorite foods when your diet kind of changes.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, so we've just thought about, it's interesting how then this goes right into the next topic that we're talking about is creating connection. Um, and you know, we know that it's not just about eating together, but wanting to be together. That's the key. And when I talk with families who are really struggling with mealtime or even with discipline, like overall there's difficulty in a child taking the lead of the parent and listening and taking instruction when there's some kind of defiance or there's a feeling of not being cooperative, um, that there's also kind of this feeling like, oh, this child is really difficult right now, or like, this is my easy one, this is my hard one.
Mhm.
And how often it also then lands in the place of food. And in a lot of ways at the table, and I ask families that I work with to send me videos of just put their camera on and let it go through their dinner time. And that way we can look at it together and we can kind of see through this lens of what we're talking about today, this emotional connection and also just how do we collect, how do we connect our children? And a lot of times what we see together is that they're like, wow, we're really kind of quiet and there's a lot of focus on the food and how much they're eating and what they're eating. Um, and that what's really going on is that there's really not this dance that needs to take place, that essentially there's this dance of the invitation. And it's instead of it being about let me come over here and let me tell you what to eat and how much to eat. It's not a
With
very
that.
that's not a very exciting invitation um to come to the table. And so we have a lot of kids who are like the dinner table is not actually right creating that emotional rest. It's actually a stressful experience. And a lot of the families, their dialogue isn't around things that are pleasant or connecting. It's around just food, how much they're going to eat, and it's pretty challenging. No worries, Amy. We're excited that you're here. Please just jump in. You can turn your camera on. We're just sharing and having a very casual conversation. So you are welcome to listen or join us. Um, so essentially, a really beautiful little story that I have to share around this idea of connection, of how do you create the invitation? It's this dance. So one of the things I'll explain to a family, for example, is, nobody would dance with you if you went over and just grabbed somebody that you thought, you wanted to dance with, and you just grabbed their hand and you started dancing. Like they'd be like kind of resistant, like what is going on? And no, and they'd maybe even pull away from you. So if we can think about our relationship with our children as needing to be invited to the dance, um, and what does that look like? Like we do a little warm up, right? We don't just direct people around and say, get over here on the dance floor. Not if we want a really wonderful, gentle, loving experience. So my daughter, she's 21 and she's had some really beautiful experiences with families as a nanny. She's been taking care of kids really since she was like 9 years old as a mother's helper, and then eventually as a babysitter. And she is amazing with children. Children are very connected to her. Um, and she had this one family, it was a single dad, and she was introduced to his little boy. He's a child who was developmentally delayed. He was in kindergarten, but probably more preschool, like more of a 3-year-old than a 5-year-old in some ways. And there were some cultural and family habits around food that were very different than what Isabel had been had experienced herself. Um, the dad fed fed him, so he didn't use his own utensils. The dad would feed him and was very coercive with food. Like you have to eat this, and I'm going to sit here and watch you eat this. And so when he introduced Isabel to the little boy, he explained like it's very important that he eats breakfast before he goes. Like it's absolutely not okay for him not to go to school before eating his breakfast. So turns out that the dad and the little boy had been late to school a lot of mornings because of this battle around breakfast. So Isabel was, Mom, what am I going to do? Like, this is not our way of, this is so uncomfortable. And so we talked a lot about like what her invitation could be. And of course, we're non-coercive around food and things like that. She um so she really decided that she was going to follow her intuition on what worked, what she loved about her own childhood experiences around food and things and the table. So she got a candle, and the little boy would come down from upstairs, and he would usually go and play right away and just wanted to play until they left for school. That would be his choice. The table obviously was not a place that he felt emotionally at rest at. And so he would wait until the battle would start. And so instead of, doing anything that was remotely what he was familiar with, she brought her own oatmeal from home, and she brought her coffee. She sat it down on the table. And when she first arrived, she would say, uh, would it be okay if I gave you a hug? And some mornings when she first would come, he would say, no. And she was like, that's fine. And then as they got to know each other, she would say, can I give you a hug this morning? And he'd be like, yeah. And so it was really wonderful. And they would have this wonderful hug. And then she would go and sit at the table, and she would light the candle, and she would put her bowl of oatmeal, and she'd have her coffee. And he used to want to have the Alexa play. So he would always ask her to turn on, some crazy music that would be a little like shocking. And she'd be like, no, I think we're just going to listen to the birds outside and the quiet of the morning. And I'm going to light our candle and turn off the lights. And I'm going to eat my oatmeal. And I would love for you to come and eat your bagel or whatever it would be. And it was just, he was very curious about this. Like, what? First of all, she was eating as well, and she lit a candle. And so he came and he was inquiring about that. And he was like, what, like, oh, I like this. I like this candle. And she's like, yes. And if we're especially quiet and we are eating our food, sometimes the fire fairies come and they flicker the candle, and we know that they're here. What? And so he was all like excited about that. And so he got his bagel and he sat at the table, and most mornings they would have this lovely breakfast together, and she never had to tell him what to eat or how much to eat. He just ate with her. So she really changed the way that, at least when she was there. So this idea that, how we can create rituals that are part of the invitation to this dance around food, and that we're focusing on the togetherness and not the food. So he was also eating by himself when the dad would say, like, the dad had already eaten or something. So eating together, and not, we're not meant to eat solo. And I thought it was really interesting in the book, Deborah mentions that it would be better for us to find out who we're going to eat with before we decide what we're going to eat. That we're not really meant to eat by ourselves. And I thought that was so interesting because it sent me back to when I had decided to go. I went to 3 different high schools as a teenager, and I can remember when I transferred to from ninth grade to 10th grade into this new high school, I didn't know anyone.
Mm.
And I thought it was just kind of intimidating to go into a cafeteria in high school in 10th grade where you didn't know anybody. And I would just take my lunch and I would go into the place that I felt the most connected, the most at ease, and that would be the theater. I loved being in the theater, and nobody would be in there because it was less stressful to be in a place, an actual environment where I felt at ease. But I look back and I'm like, that was a really lonely time for me.
Right.
So rituals. So let's take a look. Okay, no problem, Amy, no problem. Let's take a look here at the next, creating connection. And I'm going to share my screen here. Let's pull this over here so we can take a look at these points. Okay. Barbara, would you read this first one?
Sure. Cetacean
Oh,
as a relational.
it's actually satiation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Satiation as a relational dance. Satiation is depicted not merely as the alleviation of hunger, but as a relational dance involving the gift of food, where caregivers read the needs, provide generously, gather, and lead. This dance aims to bring individuals to a state of physical, emotional, and relational rest, emphasizing that satiation encompasses more than just the physical aspect.
Yeah. So she uses this word satiation as this is the key. This is the key is to, we want to satiate our children and we want to satiate their needs. And that would be not just their physical needs, but their emotional needs. And that this is actually at the foundational level of our relationship in general with our children, is that when we can satiate someone, it means that we actually jump ahead of what we think they need. We don't wait for our child to tell us they're hungry. We don't wait for them to tell us, can I have a hug? We are, as caregivers, we become what she describes in the book over and over again. The term that she uses is that we become generous caregivers. So generous that we, if our child does ask for a hug, we come at them with not only a hug, but like a snuggle and a zerbert and a kiss. Like it's like more than what they asked for. So we can always be in the lead of the caregiving rather than asking them what they need. We tend to, in North America, ask our children, how do you want me to take care of you? By asking them questions like, what do you want to eat this morning? Or are you tired? Do you need to go to sleep? Or are you cold? Did you need to bring a jacket? Like we ask a lot of questions, which are caregiving questions, and that actually really creates a feeling underneath that you don't really know me and you don't really know how to take care of me, even though they don't consciously, they wouldn't be able to tell us that. That's how it feels. And if you've ever been in a relationship, but you can think of where you wanted to be taken care of, you don't want, like if you're sick, right? And you really just need somebody to take care of you. It's really stressful if the person who's caring for you is like, do you need me to bring you another blanket? Do you want some tea? Would some broth be helpful to you? Would you like some cough drops? What about, do you want me to take your temperature? Like that would be so exhausting. Like you're ill. You need this person to just take over and like do what they know would be so like overwhelmingly generous to take care of you. That is the relationship that we need with our children at all times in terms of the emotional satiation that we're striving to. So she calls it in the book the recipe for satiation is our key here to staying in the lead and really engaging the dance, the invitation, and putting them in this emotional rest. All right, so Jana, if you want to take the next one.
Sure. The role of food as a gift. Food is portrayed as a gift that conveys care and love, suggesting that the act of offering food and the way it is presented can feel like an expression of unconditional love. This perspective shifts the focus from food as a mere sorry, from as a mere necessity to a meaningful gesture that strengthens bonds.
Yeah, so this is actually a big deal in the sense of that we tend to look at food as something that not as a gift. When a gift, if I give you a gift, my goal here when I give a gift should be that that's up to that person to receive that gift.
Mm,
They may reject it. Like in all, like if we were to really be honest about how we give something to someone either decides to receive it or reject it. And what we're seeing is that in North American culture, parents are not in that gesture with food. They're like, this is the food that I made and you will eat it. There is no option really to reject on the child's part. They do, and we're offended and we're upset and we're emotionally triggered. And what she's saying here is that if we can let go of whether or not the child receives or rejects it, but if our gesture can be in this idea that this is a gift and that my child has the option to reject or accept, and that is their prerogative, that is where they get to have autonomy. In fact, we are responsible for providing the food that we think is appropriate and nourishing, and when we're going to serve it and where we're going to serve it. And they get to decide how much of that and what they will eat. And that's very stressful. I mean, it was hilarious. I did a TikTok on that. And I had a parent immediately like, that would not go over well with my picky eaters. Because see, we're so attached to I'm responsible for you to eat good food. And if you're choosing the bread on the table rather than the chicken, I have a problem with that. So there you go. Where that is not a gift. That is eat it or else, buddy. I got to fix this picky eating problem by making you eat what I think. I have an agenda and you will fill it. And it's really not the invitation. It's not the emotional rest. It's not the connection that we want. All right. Let's see. Amy, did you want to read or are you not able? I haven't seen the last message.
I can. I'm sorry. It's just very loud here. I don't want to be disruptive to the webinar, but I'm happy to read this paragraph if it's
Oh,
helpful.
great. Okay.
Is it, sorry, generosity and receptivity?
Yes.
Okay. The narrative underscores the importance of generosity in the offering of food and the need for receptivity on the part of the child. This dynamic plays a crucial role in the dance of satiation, where a generous invitation for a relationship enables the child to take for granted the availability of their needs, fostering a sense of safety, trust, and dependence.
Yeah. So we really want them to just take for granted that there will be food and that it will be in this gesture and that we're focusing on togetherness and warmth and relaxation around this table. And we want them to just know that that is the gesture and that is the mood, and that we want them to have this feeling of being satisfied, right? What we're seeing and what's fascinating about the book is the message that our children who are uncooperative, who are defiant, who are really pushing back, that is coming out of the fact that they are feeling coerced, whether it's around food or whether it's around clean your room or do this or do that, that we're not generous caregivers in that we tend to not connect before we direct, right? We're like, we have expectations that need to be filled. We have an agenda that needs, and rather than filling this cup, when I feel connected to someone, I want to cooperate with them. I want to do and be what they want me to be because I feel so connected and loved and at rest with my emotions that I can't help myself. I want to be part of helping and doing for them. When we feel resentful and we feel a sense of being put out and we feel expectations that are more than what we feel is reasonable, then we start to pull in and want to be kind of stubborn and defiant. And so the answer to defiance is actually this idea of to be a generous caregiver and our caring, which is very opposite of North American culture. North American culture, if we feel that somebody's not being cooperative, we want to go into control, we want to go into punishment, or we want to lure them in with reward. And this is a very different perspective. All right. And so, Jana, you want to finish us out here?
Sure. The ultimate answer to vulnerability. The dance of satiation is presented as the ultimate answer to human vulnerability, suggesting that when we care for someone or depend on someone for care, we can find rest from our vulnerable condition. This perspective highlights the profound impact of nurturing relationships on our ability to cope with life's challenges.
Yeah. So being taken care of, like when you go back to that example of being sick and having someone take care of you, it's a very vulnerable place to have someone take care of you. And what we're seeing is actually because of our incredible obsession in North America with independence, we tend to want to see in our children to be independent too soon. And we're just so worried that our child won't be independent that we make them do things for themselves too early, too soon. And we see a lot of defiance around. I mean, North Americans cannot get their kids to brush their teeth. Just like I could do a whole class on brushing teeth.
Wow.
They just don't want to. Yeah. Kids are like, nope, I don't want to. And parents are like, you will get in there and you will brush your teeth. And like, there's a lot of push and pull around brush teeth, teeth brushing. So, yeah, so there's just this real interesting focus on, well, I'm not going to do for my child what he can do for himself. That's like a North American poster.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that dependence, the whole idea is when I am coming out of a place like a home life where I've been so satiated and I've been so taken care of, and my emotions are at rest, and I feel this sense of love, unconditional love from having been taken care of, and the invitation has been generous. I have a lot more motivation and interest because biology has set it up for us. Thank goodness nature is on our side. And we as humans, we want to be viable and independent. It is the way that we have been since we were embryos. The embryo grew and grew and create, all the things and parts were there, and then it was born into the world, and we've been going from crawling, on our backs to sitting up to crawling to walking to running to talking to, we want to be independent. We grow, nature grows us up. And when we as parents and caregivers, when we provide a generous place for our children to be taken care of, and to those conditions are really loving and inviting, and they don't have to work at getting love, meeting, getting their emotional needs met. And when they know that physically the things that they need are there, and there isn't this fear of punishment, but rather there's a knowing, like, oh, if you're hitting someone or you're pushing back, there must be a reason for that. Let's check in. Wait a second. Whoa, it's not like you. I can't let you hit your brother. He must have done something really terrible to you for you to reach out and lash out like that. Let's fix that. I'm here to help. Right? So we become helpers. We see them rather than thinking like there's a problem that I have to fix. That means that I have to somehow create fear around something. We're really wanting this child to be put into a vulnerable state by being taken care of, which independence doesn't do. Once we become independent, we want to be able to still go back to places of vulnerability, right? In a relationship. Like you think about your marriage, you think about even in friendship, there's a dance. One person takes care of and is in the lead, and then it switches. In a marriage, it goes back and forth. There are times when I'm taking care of my husband throughout even the day. Like I might get him a cup of coffee, and then later that day he comes and he rubs my shoulders, and then later that afternoon, like it's a dance where there's this mutual like taking care of. That's I can be vulnerable, and then I can have my alpha instincts help me take care of him or my child or my elderly parent. And then I can go into being vulnerable and having my husband take care of me or my mom come and visit when I'm ill. Is it making sense? Like there's this dance and it's a flow, and our children are in a place of we want them to be dependent on us and we want to take care of them. And then there'll be a moment where they say, I got it. I can do that myself. And they're excited. And that's when we're like, oh, that's awesome. And there may be a day still when they're like 17 and they're like, Mom, would you do that for me? Right? Like they go back to being like that little person and they're like, of course they're capable of doing that thing for, themselves, but they're just like, would you do that for me? And you're like, of course I would. Of course I'd love to. Like going into the generous caregiving. And that's the dance, is that we need humans to have soft hearts, and we need them to be in a state where they can go and they can be vulnerable to each other. And what is happening, unfortunately, is that our drive for independence is actually really destroying this idea of vulnerability. And kids are becoming defended. They don't want to be vulnerable. So we're seeing a variety of things happen as a result. At school we see kids who they know they can't be vulnerable in front of their friends because they'll be taken advantage of, they'll be bullied. We see bullies. We see and there's a reason why kids become bullies, and that has to do with their own vulnerability and inability to be vulnerable. They've become hard, their hearts have become so hard, and they have to create this alpha stance in order to feel seen and heard. And so it's very fascinating. Like this is why this book is so like there's so much here that's beyond food, that is here to be learned. Anything that I've mentioned or that we've read that you want to speak about or
I'm curious about I think that because my husband grew up in a very dysfunctional home, that it makes it difficult for him to be on the same page with, when I learn something new about parenting, or I'm just thinking of dinner time when we have like a meal that, he's very quiet and he's focused on his food. He doesn't really engage with the family. It's usually the rest of us that are chatting, and, occasionally he might contribute to that. I'm just wondering if there's a way to invite him in that is, I don't know, not putting like a undue focus on him, but in a way that maybe is sneaky.
yeah.
Like that he
Yeah.
doesn't know what my plan is. I don't know. Like to
Mhm.
just, I don't want to make him feel like he's, not contributing to mealtime, because then it's just one more thing to have to, feel bad about, I guess. I don't want to do that, but I would like to see how how to like, okay, today, what can I do for mealtime with this? I love this the idea of inviting and making it not required, but an invitation. But I can see like my husband would be like, dinner's getting cold, get over here. Kind of like that more comes from him and not from me because I'm the one that's making the food in our home. Like he doesn't tend to make dinner usually. And so I'm like, if I'm creating this atmosphere that I want and then he comes in rah, 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 like a, how
Yeah.
do I address that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
where
it's
my brain's going.
it's kind of thinking about how to um create maybe more vulnerability, right? For him to be able to be more at an emotional rest. Like what would, so the question is how can we put him in a state of more emotional rest? Um, hmm, will take some time to ponder.
Yes, I must ponder this question.
Mm.
Yeah.
I appreciate your wisdom, Jana, that pulling them onto the dance floor is not going to be helpful.
Yeah.
And so directly naming it or complaining to him
Yeah.
will enhance the challenge, I think.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
There's real wisdom in that.
Mm, thank you for saying that.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What could be your candle?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he will literally eat anything. He's quite pleased with any food like that. It's like he's like the least picky person to eat. So there's never anything like he does like certain foods that are enticing. He loves food. I don't know. So that's, easy to get him to eat. I'm also like sometimes if my youngest child is busy, then it's harder to get her to come to the table when dinner is ready. So I try to get to like, hey, just so you know, like in about 10 minutes, dinner's gonna be ready. Okay, mom. Like it's never like difficult. It's more of like, I'm not quite ready yet. And then my husband will be like, where's our kid? So like,
Mhm.
are you coming? Yeah, I'm coming. And
Mhm.
then it becomes this like, are you really coming? I'm like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh. So maybe, I don't know. I don't know how to maybe make that transition easier for my child so that my husband doesn't feel like he has to have this role of being an authority of like, you need to come to the table now. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe I need to make a different kind of candle for my child.
Well, I do know that with one family, we worked on how to bring the child into the realm of the kitchen earlier than later. So
Uh,
having a task where they either got to draw the menu for the night, and put it on a chalkboard, or which would be fun, something they liked is to draw. Um, and so that would happen like, oh, we need the menu drawn before, everybody comes to the table. And so that was fun. Or setting the table and then they're there. So they're not leaving,
yeah.
like, setting the table. Um, or even a sous chef, being the sous chef. But yeah, it's interesting the looking back at families of origin, right? And then thinking about how they play out in our partners and
Mhm.
what might have gone on in their own home around the dinner table, or what was emphasized wasn't togetherness, but it was the focus was the food.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And how do you shift that after, 50 years of doing that?
Yeah.
It's
That's tricky.
interesting. Yeah.
And I feel like again, because we have a big age gap with our kids, that like when we had all five of us, dinner time was really easy to get everybody together. But now it feels less like there's less importance when it's just the three of us for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
I have to like think about that too.
Yeah. I've found that even not having my daughter here for dinner every night has changed how we eat together, or whether we do or not. And it's interesting that that's a big shift in North America, that
Mm-hmm.
something like 30% of families eat together. and
Mm.
and that research has proven that eating together at least 3 times a week improves relationship and connection, and improve even prevents certain risk-taking behaviors.
Wow.
So it's a pretty powerful thing, this idea of togetherness and focusing on the invitation, the gathering, the leading, um, that beautiful language, and then the togetherness and finding ways. Like I loved what you were saying, high, low, buffalo, when you introduced yourself, Barbara, that I'd never heard of that. Somebody mentioned that to
Yeah.
me last week, which we use rose, thorn, and bud is similar. But things like that help people who we talked about that in one of the families that was very quiet and their focus had been on food, just to get everybody to start to share of themselves a little bit more. And that it doesn't have to be when you have young children, it doesn't have to always be like focused on them. They can also observe adults and how we communicate, as long as it's child-friendly conversation, but how we volley back and forth, and just observing conversation is so important. And we can learn a lot from other cultures. Other cultures, France and Italy, they place a lot of importance on togetherness, and the length of their meals are so like long, even their lunches. They really, don't, it's not, they have good food. We know they
Yeah.
do. Um, but they have such a ritual around the pleasantness of being together. And it can be a time of storytelling. I know that was a big part of the culture of our togetherness around the dinner table with my parents, was that we would always ask them to tell us stories from their childhood and things like that. So that can be something. And I thought it was adorable. I remember my kids saying, well, when I was little, they would tell us a story when they were little, and it was very cute.
Yes.
So maybe asking your husband to share a story about, tell us about do you remember, what's the earliest memory you have of school, or what was your favorite subject, or what was it hobbies that you really loved, and who was your best friend, and just, these kinds of things. Addressing challenges. So of course, we know that we've been sharing some of these challenges that we have, and how do we meet these challenges and transform Mealtime from a battleground into this peaceful place? And thankfully, it sounds like, for the most part, those of you the two of you that are sharing have shared that you don't have a lot of maybe battlegrounds. I don't know if there's picky eating going on. Didn't sound like that was something that was coming up for you. That's a big one here in North America. So let's take a look at some of the key things that we can do that will really help us have this content of when problems do arise. Whoops. I wanted to do something with AI. Okay. All right. So addressing challenges. Let's see. Barbara, you want to read the
Sure.
first one?
Understanding counter will. Recognize that resistance or counter will from a child is a natural and developmental response when they feel controlled or coerced. It is essential for developing a separate sense of self and independence. Parents should not take this personally, but rather consider the developmental needs of the child.
Yeah. So in North America, we consider counter will, it has mild and extreme ways of showing up. And as independent, knowing that we as human beings are meant to be these viable, independent beings, when we are told to do something, in a very direct way, in the sense of without connection, without the feeling of this dance and this coming from a place of satiation, we feel our opposite will, our counter will, is triggered. And in an extreme sense, we have even a diagnosis that from a Neufeld perspective, he doesn't believe in it, but we have oppositional defiant disorder has been something that's been labeled. This is really just extreme counter will, typically coming and stemming out of a child who has been in a very pervasive, coercive, punishing environment. And parents typically on a general and mild view of counter will, we've experienced counter will, I'm sure we can all say, like, I know very well, I am not a person, I do not like to be micromanaged. I don't like people telling me what I'm going to do. I really love my independence, right? Why would a child be any different? So it's really difficult though. How do we, children can't be in charge of themselves. And so I think what's interesting is how pervasive this comes out around a dinner table because of our desire for them to meet our agenda and our objective of eating certain things and how much of certain things. And the whole thrust of, I hope what you're gaining to understand is that that part of it, what they eat, of what we've served, and how much is just simply not up to us. That is simply up to them. That's where they get to show their autonomy. And we have teenagers, right, who I know I've said, hey guys, it's dinner time. And somebody will be like, oh, I'm not hungry. And I'll just be like, oh, no, no problem. Just come to the table. I just want to see your face. I don't want to hear about your day. You don't have to eat anything. Just come and see me and come sit with us. So when we focus on togetherness and not food, we're still collecting, connecting, and focusing on togetherness. And so we don't want to engage this counter will, especially at the dinner table. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, was that you, Barbara, or I just forgot who read?
I just did, so
Yeah.
I think.
Jana, if you want to read.
Sure. Prioritizing the child over problems. Ensure that solving a problem does not become more important than the relationship with the child. The child should always feel loved and supported, regardless of the issues at hand. Adopt a leadership role that is based on guidance rather than control or coercion.
Yeah, so this is, obviously easier said than done, right? So we get we get into situations where, I have, especially tweens and teens, I have clients who, where children have really done some pretty really disappointing things, and their behavior was just, wow, that was really shocking and so disappointing and really infuriating for parents. And they want to go into punishing and shaming mode because they're so shocked by the behavior, then what they would consider, of course, misbehavior of their child. And it's interesting though, when we really understand that we're coming at this, we're prioritizing, like whatever this behavior was and this problem, we have to get underneath where that came from, because we are noble beings and we are loving and generous and kind and just, and we have all these beautiful qualities. And when we act outside of those qualities and we are acting out of our lower nature, our lower self, as generous caregivers, it's our job to figure out what has thrown this human off track, what's thrown them from their higher nature into their lower nature. And that can be a 3-year-old or it can be a 13-year-old. If we go at it by looking at them and coming at it from this perspective of like, you're not okay, that was wrong, and you will pay, right? You're going to, I'm taking this away, you're not going here, no more of that friend. Like we're taking away what they're attached, the things that they are close to, the things they're attached to, we take those things away. And then, of course, we get even more of a feeling of disconnect Now we're even more in a competitive relationship. Like now we're really losing our influence because it's become personal, because we've taken away things that they care about. So that's not the way to go. What we want to do is come alongside them and be looking in the same direction, be like, wow, that was some behavior that was not expected. I am really surprised. And I really need to know what's going on for you. And I love you. And that wasn't okay. And we're going to get through this together. And we're going to learn more about what happened. Right. So we're coming alongside them. And it's a very different thing. And we're prioritizing that I care about this kid more than I care about this problem. We're going to get through this problem. We can get through anything. We're in this together. But when we go at it where somehow now the child has become the problem, that's when we find ourselves in a real difficult situation. And now we're disconnected and we lose our influence for them to even want to listen to us. Amy, are you there? You want to read Parenting as a Transformational Journey?
Sure. Parenting as a transformational journey. Embrace parenting as a rite of passage that transforms the caregiver. This transformation is shaped by the love and care provided to the child, fulfilling their needs for attachment.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Like when we really shift our perspective, we think our love is what needs to be enough for a child to do what we want them to do. Our love should be enough. I love them. I have all the love in the world for this child. So why are they not following my lead? When in reality, it's not our love for them. It's not their love for us. No. It's confusing. No, we think that our love for them should be enough for them to follow us, when in reality, it's their love for us. And what I find really fascinating is something that there was a man that I read his book. His name is Dan Jordan, and those of you who are familiar with the Baha'i faith would know who he is, perhaps. And one of the things that he wrote in this book that I've been reading is that we all know that we are to love everyone, that we're to be loving and love people. And we know how hard that is. And he says, the question, we get it. We're supposed to love everyone. So the self-reflection part is, am I lovable? Am I a person who's actually a lovable person? Am I helping others love me? Or am I actually is it pretty hard to love me? My behaviors or my attitude or the way that I am I hard to love? That's our self-reflection. Now, our children aren't in that space. We have to think about, but we know that it's their love for us. So we want them to know, we want them to find it really easy to love us. That doesn't mean that we let them do what they want. Our job is to keep them safe. That's our job, and setting boundaries and things like that. But when we go at them in the way that is a combative, punishing, taking away things they care about in order to get them to do what we want, we become very hard to love for them. And when we become hard to love, they don't want to follow us. They don't want us to be in the lead. They want to be in the lead because that doesn't feel, they don't want to follow someone they don't think is very nice. So it's about knowing the difference. I need to set a boundary, and you don't have to like me, right? I'm not your friend as a parent, but I do want them to know that my boundary is for their safety because I love them. So it's a really tricky thing to think, oh, but if this is a rite of passage, this parenting journey for me, it's not about figuring out, all of my parent coaching clients come to me initially and they're like, okay, so how are we going to get my kid to do X, Y, Z? And my question for them is actually, I really want to learn more about how we can get you to do X, Y, Z, right? It's a transformational journey for us. And we are the ones that have to figure out what is it that what's getting in the way of this relationship? Are we letting our child not have too many, are they don't have enough boundaries? Or do they have too many? Are they too rigid? Are they too coercive? So we have to figure out, how do we create this rite of passage for ourselves, that we're changing. We're the ones that are being changed by it. Meeting needs, not responding to demands. Focus on meeting the child's needs proactively rather than merely reacting to their demands without excessive questioning. Demonstrating care through anticipation fosters a sense of security, independence, which is key to nourishment. So this was something that we've been really talking about throughout the thing, is just how we want to figure out how to meet needs before our child is even asking. Like we never would want a child to be asking when their next meal is coming, or wondering, if they're going to get a snack or whatever. Like, we're on it. That's where routine and rhythm and the beauty of creating ritual, and them being able to rest in our care. If they can rest in our care, they can rest in our love. And when they have a problem, we're going to get through it together. We're going to come alongside them. So it's a very different paradigm. So given all of this wonderful content, and I'm so appreciative of all of you coming and joining me to talk about this today. Is there any one thing that you're really taking away that you're like, okay, I've got something here that I didn't know before? Anything that you want to just share as your ending closure comment?
I know for me, this has reinforced that one of the things our daughter does with their grandson is she will say to him, my job is to provide you with food, and your job is to choose what you want to eat.
Very nice.
And it just, that was a little bit of a shift for me, and I always supported it, but now I really get it.
Yeah. So perfect. That's
Mhm.
awesome.
Rayleigh and I talk often.
Yeah.
And we've been sort of talking about this idea of satiation, and really like staying a step ahead of, what their needs are. And I and have been sort of trying to practice that for the last couple of weeks, or however long it's been, and thinking about how before I really asked a lot of questions of my youngest child, who's 12, of like, what do you want to eat? Are you hungry? Like all those kinds of questions. And so lately I've just been like, it's time, for food. Like, I bet my child's hungry, and I'll just like provide the food. Thanks, Mom. Like, it's always like this,
Yeah.
like, and I'm realizing too, like, I'm thinking about like my eating time frame isn't the same as hers. So something that we had done for a really long time is to play games while either one of us is eating or both of us are eating, because it's usually the two of us in the morning, because my husband leaves for work before we are awake. And so that is like this one of the rituals that we have done. We might play Yahtzee or cards, or lately we've been playing tic-tac-toe, which is really hilarious because, tic-tac-toe. But we changed the rules a little bit. Anyways, it just gets a little bit creative. And so I'm kind of like in the moment, just patting myself on the back a little bit, but knowing like why those things are helpful and why they work. But now I'm kind of thinking more about like our evening meal, and how we can make that more inviting for every member of the family, and also more, I guess, fun or connecting. Yeah.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point that we didn't even cover. That's actually something that she talks a lot about, is that you can reduce some of the coercion or challenge with play. Play is true play, has no outcome, has no agenda. And so, doing silly things, like one parent was like, oh, I invite the children to the dinner table with an English accent, like, all right, everybody, come to dinner, whatever. you know, being
Yes.
fun and silly is something that children respond to immediately. Like, yeah, it's such a wonderful way. So playing games and things like that are a great idea. All right, so let's see. Amy has her comment. She says, she loves the idea of setting the environment for enjoyment, not stress. True for both the feasts of meal times and family devotions. Yes.
Mm,
Wonderful.
yeah, that's
Absolutely.
nice.
Yeah, that, thinking about something like devotions where sometimes little ones would be like, I don't want to pray, I don't want to say anything or whatever. The invitation, what can the invitation be? And that they can accept or reject. That's where their autonomy lies. So, such great insights, guys. Thank you so much. This was fun. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care
Thank
and have
you.
a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you
Thank
so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Amy. Bye-bye.